The morning mist in the small town of Oak Creek was thick, the kind that clings to your skin and makes everything feel heavy. For the residents of Willow Street, life followed a predictable rhythm. But for the last 3 weeks, that rhythm had been haunted by a low, mechanical growl. Every morning, at exactly 7:15 a.m., a blacked-out Harley-Davidson would rumble into the neighborhood. The rider was a mountain of a man, clad in worn-out leather, his face hidden behind a mirrored visor. He wore the patches of a notorious motorcycle club, symbols that spoke of a world most people only saw in movies and feared in reality. He didn't talk. He didn't wave. He simply sat there at the corner of the park, his engine idling like a predator waiting for its moment. The neighborhood was on edge. Parents clutched their children's hands a little tighter as they walked to the bus stop. Whispers turned into rumors, and rumors turned into a quiet, simmering panic. They called him the shadow on the asphalt. Mrs. Gable, who lived in the corner house, had already called the local police 3 times, but the officers always gave the same answer. He wasn't breaking any laws. He was just sitting on public property. But to the parents of Oak Creek, it felt like a countdown to a tragedy. They didn't see the way his eyes scanned the tree line, or how he checked his side mirrors every time a non-local car drove past. They only saw a monster in leather. Among the children at the bus stop was 8-year-old Lily. She was a quiet girl with bright eyes and a backpack that seemed too big for her small frame. Her mother, Sarah, was a single parent working 2 jobs, and every morning she felt a knot in her stomach as she watched that massive biker watch her daughter. She tried to change their route, but the biker always seemed to be there, lurking just at the edge of the street. Sarah felt helpless. She didn't have a husband to protect them, and the law wouldn't move until something happened. She spent her nights staring out the window, wondering what this man wanted. Was he scouting the houses? Was he waiting for the perfect moment to snatch someone? What Sarah didn't know was that the biker, whose name was Jax, had spent his nights very differently. While the town slept, Jax was parked in a hidden alleyway 2 miles away, watching a rusted white Ford van that didn't belong in this county. He had seen the men inside that van. He recognized their faces from old posters in a clubhouse halfway across the country. They were professionals, the kind of men who traded in human lives. Jax knew that if he went to the police, they'd see his tattoos and his record and throw him in a cell before he could finish his first sentence. He was a man with a past, and in a town like Oak Creek, your past is your only identity. The tension reached a breaking point on a Tuesday. The rain was pouring down in sheets, and the visibility was nearly zero. Sarah was running late for work, her car battery had died, and she had to walk Lily to the bus stop under a shared umbrella. As they approached the corner, the familiar roar of the Harley cut through the sound of the rain. There he was, drenched but unmoving, his bike gleaming under the dim streetlights. Sarah stopped in her tracks. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at the biker, then at her daughter, and for a moment she considered running back home and locking the door. But she couldn't lose her job. She took a deep breath, gripped Lily's hand and walked past him. As they passed, the biker turned his head. Through the rain-streaked visor, Sarah felt his gaze. It wasn't a look of aggression, but something else, something cold and focused. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small laminated card, holding it out toward Sarah. Terrified, she pulled Lily away and ran toward the bus. Jax watched them go, his hands slowly dropping back to his side. The card was a simple warning, typed out in bold letters. Keep her close. Don't let her walk alone. He knew the time was coming. The van had been moving closer every day, testing the response times of the local patrol cars. As the yellow school bus pulled up, Sarah watched Lily climb the steps. She stayed until the bus disappeared around the corner. When she turned back, the biker was gone. He had vanished into the gray mist as quickly as he had appeared. That evening, the town council held an emergency meeting. The room was packed with angry parents. They demanded action. They wanted the biker banned from the town. They wanted a police escort for the school bus. The fear had turned into a frenzy. Everyone had a theory, each one darker than the last. The chief of police tried to calm them, but the people were hysterical. He's a predator. One father screamed. He's waiting for the right moment. While the town shouted, Jax was miles away, deep in the woods. He had found the blind spot. A stretch of road where the highway dipped between two hills and the cell service dropped to zero. He found fresh tire tracks in the mud, the exact width of the Ford van. He knew this was where they would do it. He spent the night in the mud, camouflaging his bike with branches, waiting. He didn't have a gun. He only had his father's old heavy-duty wrench and a lifetime of knowing how to survive a fight. He was tired. His old injuries from his days in the service were aching in the damp cold. But he didn't move. He owed this to the world. Years ago, he hadn't been there to protect his own sister. He wasn't going to let it happen again. The next morning, the air was unusually still. Jax was back at his usual spot on Willow Street at 7 a.m. But he looked different. His gear was covered in dried mud, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. Sarah dropped Lily off, and instead of heading to the train station, she hid behind a large oak tree, determined to see what happened next. The bus arrived, Lily got on, and the bus began its journey toward the elementary school 3 miles away. To Sarah's horror, Jax didn't just sit there. He kicked his kickstand up, roared his engine, and began to follow the bus at a high speed. Sarah's heart stopped. This was it. The nightmare was starting. She ran to her neighbor's house, screaming for them to call the police. Within minutes, 2 squad cars were racing down the highway, sirens blaring. They spotted the biker about a mile behind the bus. They surged forward, cutting him off and forcing him to the shoulder of the road. Officers jumped out with their weapons drawn, shouting for the rider to get off the bike. The biker didn't resist. He slowly put the kickstand down, raised his hands, and removed his helmet. For the first time, the town saw his face. He was older than they expected, with deep scars running across his jaw and eyes that looked like they had seen the end of the world. "Search him," the lead officer barked. They found nothing but the wrench and a cell phone. "Why are you following that bus?" the officer demanded, his voice trembling with adrenaline. The biker didn't answer. He just looked toward the woods, his face pale. "Check the bus," the biker finally said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "You're wasting time on me." The van took the shortcut through the old mill road. "Check the bus." The officers were confused, but a radio call suddenly came through from the school. The bus had never arrived. It was 15 minutes late, and the driver wasn't answering the radio. Panic erupted. The police left Jax handcuffed on the side of the road with a junior officer and raced toward the back roads. About 2 miles into the wooded stretch of the highway, they found the bus. It had been run off the road into a ditch. The driver was unconscious, slumped over the steering wheel after being hit with a blunt object. But the children were gone. The back door was wide open, and the muddy ground was covered in footprints leading toward a clearing where the white van had been waiting. The officers called for backup, K9 units and helicopters, but the forest was dense, and the trail was going cold. Back on the shoulder of the highway, Jax sat on the ground. He looked at the young officer guarding him. "Kid, if you don't let me go, those kids are gone," Jax said quietly. "I know where that van is going. There's an old hunting cabin 3 miles north. It's the only place with a basement deep enough to hide a group. Your sirens warned them. They aren't going to the highway now. They're going to ground." The officer looked at Jax, then at the radio. He heard the chaos of his superiors failing to find a trail. He looked at the scars on Jax's face and saw something he didn't expect. Genuine, agonizing fear for those children. The young officer took a risk that would later cost him his badge. He unlocked the cuffs. "If you're lying, I'm dead," the officer said. Jax didn't respond. He just grabbed his helmet, jumped on his bike, and rode into the woods, ignoring the road entirely. Jax rode like a man possessed, jumping logs and skidding through mud that would have stalled any other vehicle. He reached the cabin just as the 2 men were moving the children from the van into the cellar. He didn't wait for backup. He drove the Harley straight through the front porch railing, the sound of the crashing wood and the roaring engine blinding the kidnappers with confusion. Jax was off the bike before it even stopped sliding. He was a whirlwind of leather and fury. He took the first man down with a single blow. The second man pulled a knife, but Jax didn't flinch. He took a slash to the arm just to get close enough to put the man into a sleeper hold. By the time the police helicopters spotted the heat signatures of the bike, Jax was sitting on the porch steps, his arm bleeding heavily, with the two kidnappers tied up with their own zip ties. The children were gathered around him. Lily was sitting right next to him, holding onto the sleeve of his leather jacket. She wasn't crying anymore. She felt safer next to this monster than she had ever felt in her life. As the sun began to set, the cabin was swarmed by police and ambulances. The kidnappers were hauled away in chains. Sarah arrived in a frantic state, screaming for Lily. She found her daughter, and after a long tearful embrace, Lily pointed to Jax, who was being treated by a paramedic nearby. Sarah walked up to him. She looked at the man she had spent weeks hating and fearing. She looked at the blood on his jacket and the exhaustion in his eyes. She realized that while the entire neighborhood was tucked away in their safe homes, judging him, he was the only one who had truly been awake. He was the only one who had seen the danger coming. She reached out and took his hand. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "We were all so wrong about you." Jax looked up at her, a faint, tired smile breaking through his rugged exterior. "People usually are," he said simply. He refused to go to the hospital. He waited until every child was accounted for. Then he stood up, thanked the young officer who had uncuffed him, and climbed back onto his dented, mud-caked Harley. The next morning at 7:15 a.m., the corner of Willow Street was empty. The silence was deafening. The residents of Oak Creek went back to their lives, but the atmosphere had shifted. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound sense of shame. They realized that heroes don't always look like the ones in the storybooks. Sometimes they come with loud engines and scarred faces. Lily often looked at that corner on her way to the bus, hoping to see the black bike again. She never did. But whenever she heard the distant roar of an engine on the highway, she knew she wasn't alone. The angels of the asphalt were still out there, riding in the shadows, making sure the monsters stayed away.